In the underworld, power is not announced, it is demonstrated. And the most dangerous lesson a feared man can learn is that the one person he came to break is the one person he should have been afraid of all along. He walked into the diner expecting to leave a message written in her humiliation. He left instead with her name carved into his thoughts like a scar, and the slow dawning horror that he had just made the single most consequential mistake of his career. Because Marisol Vega did not crumble. Marisol Vega stared back, and in a city where men like Dante Ferraro had built entire empires on the certainty that everyone eventually broke. That revelation was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted, and neither of them, in the end, would want to walk back from. She had been working the morning shift at Coppola's diner on West Carmela Street for 3 years when Dante Ferraro walked through the door. 3 years of carrying plates wide enough to balance on a forearm, of moving between tables in a way that made her body useful, her center of gravity low and solid, her arms strong from the weight of loaded trays, her reflexes sharpened by 12-hour shifts in a kitchen that punished slowness. She was 29 years old. She wore a size 18 uniform that fit her like a second skin. Dark hair pinned back from a face that was softer than the world she lived in, and she had eyes the color of strong coffee. Still and watchful, the kind that absorbed everything and gave back nothing. The regular customers called her by name. The new ones underestimated her. Everyone who worked the diner knew, without ever saying it aloud, that Marisol was the one who ran the floor. Not the manager, not the owner, Mr. Coppola Sr., who sat in the back counting receipts and pretending to supervise. Marisol. She balanced the books in her head, mediated between line cooks, and had, on more than one occasion, quietly removed a drunk from a booth with one hand gripping his collar before the situation could become something requiring a police report. She did not advertise any of this. She carried the plates, she said thank you, she refilled the coffee. She made herself easy to overlook. She had learned. From the debt her late mother had left her, from the loan shark named Benny Rosso, who came by every second Friday to collect, from years of living on the narrowest edge of a financial disaster she could not outrun. That visibility was a liability. You stayed small. You stayed quiet. You survived. It was a philosophy that had kept her safe for a long time, and it was a philosophy that was, on this particular Tuesday morning, about to be retired permanently. Dante Ferraro was not small. He was 6 feet and 2 inches of controlled menace, dressed in a charcoal Brioni suit that had not been purchased anywhere in this zip code, a Panerai watch on his left wrist, and a face that newspapers in this city described as either handsome or terrifying, depending on who was writing and how much they valued their continued employment. He was 36, the architect of a criminal organization so structurally sophisticated that 3 consecutive federal task forces had failed to dismantle it. He was known in the underworld as Il Direttore, the director, because his people said he did not react to situations. He composed them, the way a conductor writes a score before the musicians ever enter the room. He had never, in his adult professional life, walked into a location he did not own or control. And the sensation of uncertainty, when it occasionally arrived, was something he had learned to treat not as a threat, but as information. He owned, through a series of shell companies, his lawyers were very well paid to maintain, most of the commercial real estate on West Carmela Street, including the building in which Coppola's diner operated. He had come this particular Tuesday morning because Benny Rosso, small, stupid, and recently very late with his tribute payments, had made the error of conducting his loan sharking operation on Ferraro territory without permission, and Marisol Vega's name had appeared in Benny's ledger as a debtor. Ferraro's man, Tommaso, a wide-shouldered, dark-eyed enforcer who had broken more fingers than he could accurately count, had brought the ledger to Ferraro's attention the previous evening. Ferraro had looked at the address. He had made a decision. He would handle this himself. Not because it was strategically necessary, but because he was curious. Benny was bold enough to operate on his street. He wanted to understand exactly how bold, and more importantly, how stupid. In Ferraro's experience, the two qualities traveled together with remarkable consistency. He sat in the corner booth at 7:43 in the morning and ordered black coffee and nothing else. Marisol brought it without being told to hurry and without flinching at the quality of his suit, which most of her customers could not have identified as expensive. She set the cup in front of him and turned to go. His voice stopped her. "Sit down." It was not loud. It did not need to be. She turned back. He had not looked up from the menu he was no longer reading. She studied the back of his hand on the laminated plastic, the scar across the second and third knuckle, the precision of the watch, the absolute stillness of a man who never moved without intention. She knew who he was, not his name. She did not need his name. She knew the category. She had grown up in the Carmela district. She knew what men in suits and corner booths at 7 in the morning meant, and what the stillness around them meant, and what the quality of silence that Tommaso was generating near the door meant. She sat down. "You're Marisol Vega," Ferraro said. It was not a question. "I am," she said. "Benny Rosso has you in his book for $9,000 at 30% monthly," he said, still not looking at her. "Tell me how that happened." And something in Marisol Vega, something that had been quietly, stubbornly, carefully accumulating for 29 years of being overlooked and underpaid and underestimated and told in 100 unspoken ways that her size and her situation and her gender were a ceiling she should be grateful to simply touch, went still in a way that was different from the careful stillness of invisibility. This was the stillness of a decision being made. The stillness of someone who had done the math long ago and was simply waiting for the right moment to show their work. She put both her forearms on the table. She leaned forward. And when Dante Ferraro finally looked up, he found that she was already looking at him, not with fear, not with the particular kind of desperate pleading he had seen on the face of every person Benny Rosso had ever squeezed. She was looking at him the way a person looks at a math problem they have already solved and are waiting to see if anyone else catches up. "Benny's book is fraudulent," she said. Her voice was even, low, precise in the way of someone who had rehearsed nothing and needed to rehearse nothing because they were simply reporting what they knew. "The original loan was $3,000. I've paid back $4,000 in 8 months. The interest he quotes me changes every time he shows up, never in my favor, never with a consistent formula. I have every receipt I've ever given him, photographed and uploaded to a cloud account, and I have a ledger of my own that tracks every payment against every claimed balance." She watched his expression. His jaw shifted slightly. A micro-adjustment, the only signal she was going to get from a face that had been trained across decades to give nothing away. She pressed on. "I also have the names of 6 other women on this street who are in Benny's book for loans they've already repaid, which means Benny is either independently inventing debt or someone authorized him to pad the numbers. And either way, the fraud is documented and consistent." She reached into her apron pocket, placed a folded piece of paper on the table between them, and slid it toward him with 2 fingers, deliberate, unhurried, as though she were delivering a check. "That's a list of the 6 names and the total amounts fabricated across all of them. I'm guessing," she said, "that Benny owes you a percentage of what he collects, which means someone has been skimming from you for at least a year, because the amounts are too consistent to be improvised. It's a system. Someone built it carefully, and someone has been maintaining it." The silence that followed was complete. Ferraro looked at the paper. He did not touch it yet. His eyes came back to her face with a quality of attention she had never received from a man like him. From any man, if she was being precise. And there was something in them she registered as a genuine recalibration. Like a machine encountering an input it was not designed to process and choosing, instead of rejecting the data, to rebuild the model. You figured that out, he said slowly. How? Marisol tilted her head 1 degree. I did the math, she said. I've been doing math my whole life. It's not hard when the numbers don't lie. Tommaso materialized from the direction of the door. He was, Marisol noticed, trying to look large in a way that suggested he had been instructed to provide pressure at this particular moment if the conversation moved in an inconvenient direction. He placed both hands on the back of Ferraro's booth and leaned forward in the practiced posture of a man who had learned that his size was a communication device. He was looking at her with the expression men like him deployed when they wanted a woman to remember her place. The slow scan that started at her face and moved downward and then back up with a visible recalibration of his estimate of her. Not upward, but further down, taking in the uniform and the apron and the soft fullness of her and arriving at a conclusion that she recognized because she had been watching men arrive at that same conclusion since she was 16 years old. You're a waitress, Tommaso said. He let the word land with the full weight of condescension it was designed to carry. His lip curled, the involuntary expression of a man who believed her size and her job and her gender were a complete accounting of what she was worth. Sweetheart, he started, why don't you... Marisol looked at Tommaso for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked back at Ferraro. He was about to say something that would embarrass you, she observed, with the calm tone of someone noting that a window had been left open in the rain. You might want to stop him before he finishes, because I suspect you're still deciding whether what I've given you makes you angry or grateful. And whatever he says next is going to make that decision considerably harder to make in the direction that's useful to either of us. The silence that followed was of a different quality entirely, charged and absolute and oriented entirely toward Dante Ferraro's next word. He said it without looking away from her face. Tommaso, sit in the car. The speed of Tommaso's departure was itself a kind of information. She filed it. Ferraro picked up the paper. He read it with the focused efficiency of a man who retained everything in a single pass. He set it down. He finally picked up the coffee she had brought him and drank. When he put the cup back, he looked at her with something that was not warmth exactly, but was the most precise approximation of respect she had ever received from a man who had not been obligated to give it. Your debt to Benny Rosso, he said, is erased. As of today, his operation on this street is finished. As of today. He paused, looking at her as though measuring something. You can go back to work. Marisol did not thank him. She stood up, straightened her apron, and picked up the nearby coffee pot. Your cup's empty, she said. You want a refill? Something crossed Dante Ferraro's face so quickly she nearly missed it. Nearly. She was fairly certain it was the beginning of a smile. And it was, she thought, the most expensive-looking thing she had seen all morning. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. He ordered black coffee and nothing else, and he sat in the corner booth, and he brought work with him. Thick leather portfolios and his phone, and the focused silence of a man who could make any location a headquarters simply by occupying it. On the 4th morning, he had Tommaso carry in a leather portfolio that he opened on the table, and which, she could see from 3 tables away, contained columns of numbers dense enough to be a financial document of some complexity. He did not call her over. He simply worked. But twice in that hour, she caught him watching her navigate the floor. The careful geometry of it. The way she moved around other bodies without apology or collision. The way she balanced 4 plates at once with an accuracy that was, if you actually paid attention to it, something close to athletic. He was a man who noticed everything. She had registered this from the first morning. He was now applying that noticing to her in a way that was different from Tommaso's noticing. Clinical, where Tommaso's had been dismissive, genuinely curious where Tommaso's had been reductive. And she was not entirely sure what to do with it, except to keep moving and to keep doing her job well, which she had always done regardless of who was watching. On the 5th morning, he said, when she refilled his cup, I have a problem with a ledger. She looked at him. What kind of ledger? The kind that doesn't balance, he said, and hasn't for 6 months, and my 3 accountants cannot identify the source of the discrepancy. She looked at the portfolio. She looked at him. The calculation she ran in that moment was not just mathematical. I have a break at 9, she said. At 9 she sat across from him, pulled the portfolio toward herself, and found the error in 11 minutes. It was elegant, actually. A recurring false entry inserted at quarterly intervals, designed to be invisible against the noise of legitimate high-volume transactions. Whoever had built it was patient and technically sophisticated and had bet heavily on the assumption that the volume of legitimate activity would provide permanent cover. She circled the entry with his pen, wrote the corrected figures in the margin in her own handwriting. Neat, precise, the handwriting of someone who had been keeping books since childhood. And slid the portfolio back across the table. He stared at the page. His expression did not change, but something behind it moved. "Who taught you to read a ledger like that?" he said. "My mother ran 3 jobs and kept her own books," she said. "She taught me. She said that if a man can read your numbers better than you can, he owns you. So you learn to read them faster than he does." He was quiet for a moment, in which she could see him processing something that went beyond the ledger. "The person who built that entry works for me," he said carefully. "I know," she said. "That's why it took 6 months to surface. You weren't looking at the people you trusted. You were looking at the variables." He looked at her for a long, still moment. Then, "Come work for me." Marisol looked back at him steadily. "Doing what?" "Whatever you just did," he said. "I'll pay you 3 times what this diner pays you in a year, and I'll clear the building's lease so Coppola's never has another Benny Rosso situation while you're in it." Marisol was quiet. She thought about the $9,000 number in Benny's fraudulent ledger. She thought about the 6 women whose names she had written on that piece of paper, still carrying debt that had been invented for them by someone who had concluded they were too frightened or too isolated to fight back. She thought about her mother's handwriting in the margins of a composition notebook, columns of figures, and the lesson that ran beneath all of them. Know your numbers, and nobody owns you. She thought about what she was being offered, and what it meant, and what it would cost, and what, in the other direction, it would give. "I have conditions," she said. He inclined his head. She listed them. A formal contract reviewed by an independent attorney of her choosing. A guaranteed salary, not contingent on any single project's outcome, and the remaining debt of every woman on Benny Rosso's list, cleared in full, not negotiated down, cleared. He listened without interrupting. He said, "Done." She said, "Then we have a great deal more to discuss." It was Marisol who found the mole. Tommaso confirmed it, and the distinction mattered to her, and she believed, in the way that she had begun to believe many things about Dante Ferraro that she had not expected to believe, that it had begun to matter to him too. The mole's name was Carmine Setti, 42 years old, a mid-level financial manager, patient and meticulous, and catastrophically underestimated by the people who trusted him, which was, she noted with a grim private satisfaction, a mistake she understood intimately from the other direction. Carmine had been funneling extracted funds through the ledger entries she had identified, routing them to a rival organization called the Calabrese Syndicate, who were attempting with typical ambition and insufficient subtlety to map the internal financial architecture of Ferraro's operations. She had found, by the 3rd week of her employment, 3 additional compromised accounts, a secondary extraction mechanism running through a payroll processing system, and the probable identity of Carmine's contact inside the Calabrese structure. She delivered all of this to Ferraro in a meeting that included Tommaso and 2 other men she had learned were his senior lieutenants, Enzo and Raffaella, both of whom had received her the first week with the particular wariness of men who have been told to accept something they do not yet understand. And she delivered it, without preamble and without apology, for the space she occupied at their conference table. She had stopped apologizing for the space she occupied somewhere in the second week. There had been a specific moment. She had been working at Ferraro's downtown offices, a glass and concrete tower on the Ferraro-owned block of Via Ressa, running a projection model against the corrected ledger figures, and she had caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. Full and accidental, the kind of reflection you encounter rather than seek. She had barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because anything external had changed, because something in the posture was different. She was standing straight, not performing straightness, not holding herself upright, with the conscious effort of someone resisting the lifelong habit of compression. Simply standing as though she took up the space she occupied as a matter of fact, not a matter of apology. She had not realized until that moment how much of her life she had spent in active, effortful contraction. Ferraro had come to stand beside her. He was close enough that she could feel the slight displacement of air, could catch the cold cedar and leather of his presence. He looked at the window, at her reflection in it, and said quietly, "You see it." She said, "See what?" He said, "What you actually are." She had not had a response to that. He had not seemed to need one. He had looked at her reflection for one more moment and then walked back to his desk, and she had turned back to her model, and the numbers had not changed, but something in the room had. The Calabresi sent 3 men to the Via Ressa offices on a Thursday evening in late October, when the building was theoretically empty, and the security rotation had a gap that someone had shared with them through Carmine's contact. They had expected to find physical files, hard drives, documentary evidence they could use to structure a case or a leverage play against Ferraro's operation. What they found instead was Marisol, who had stayed late because she was finalizing a reconciliation that was not going to wait until morning, and who was, as a result, working alone in the dark of the secondary office with only her laptop screen and the city lights through the window for illumination. She heard them in the corridor 40 seconds before they reached the door. The particular quiet of men trying to move silently, which always sounded, to someone paying attention, louder than normal footsteps. She turned off her screen. She moved to the door. She thought, with the calm detachment of someone whose brain had always operated best under pressure, about geometry. The first man who came through the door ran directly into a metal filing cabinet drawer she had opened at precisely the height of his face, and went down without another sound. The second hesitated in the dark doorway. 1 beat, half a beat. Long enough for her to sweep his ankle in a movement that was more physics than fighting. His center of gravity was wrong. She knew exactly where hers was, and the result was that he went sideways into the third man, and she had both of their wrists secured with cable ties, before either of them had fully processed what had happened. She had pocketed the cable ties from the supply closet 3 days ago, on an instinct she had not entirely been able to name at the time, and which now seemed less like instinct and more like preparation. She called Tommaso. She said, "I have 3 men from the Calabresi group in Ferraro's secondary office. 2 are secured. 1 has a broken nose and is not currently a problem." Tommaso was silent for 2 full seconds, the longest pause she had heard from him. Then he said, in a voice that she recognized as the sound of a man revising a significant number of previously held assumptions, "Don't move anything. I'm coming now." Marisol looked at the 3 men on the floor. She said, "Tell Ferraro." She sat on the edge of the desk and waited, and the city moved below the window like a river that did not know or care what was happening in the lit glass box above it. Ferraro arrived 14 minutes after Tommaso, in a coat thrown over dress clothes, the contained energy of a man who had processed the information on the way over and arrived already decided. He stood in the doorway. He looked at the 3 Calabresi men on the floor. His gaze moved across the room with the precise inventory of someone who missed nothing. The open cabinet drawer, the cable ties, the laptop still dark on the desk, the coffee she had been drinking cold beside it. Then he looked at her. She was sitting on the edge of the desk with her arms crossed and her expression neutral, and she did not move or alter her posture when he looked at her, because she had decided, somewhere between the first man's face meeting the cabinet drawer and Tommaso's voice on the phone, that she was done altering herself for any room she was in. His expression was not surprise. It was past surprise, operating at some altitude beyond it that was closer to a reckoning with something he had been approaching for weeks without quite naming. 3 of them, he said. There were only 3, she said. I didn't want to overstate it. He said nothing for a moment. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, closer than he had been before, close enough that the choice was hold ground or step back, and she held ground the way she always held ground, with her weight settled and her eyes level, and the quiet internal knowledge that she had already decided this before he moved. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. You are, he said finally, his voice lower than usual and carrying something that was not his normal command register, something rawer, more honest, the voice of a man speaking without the architecture he usually deployed. The most dangerous person who has ever been in one of my rooms. She held his gaze. I was a waitress, she said. I've been carrying the weight for a long time. Turns out that was preparation. The smile arrived fully then. Not the beginning of one, not the controlled approximation she had caught glimpses of across weeks of corner booth mornings and ledger corrections and 1,000 small recalibrations. The complete version. It was, she thought, the most unexpectedly devastating thing about him, because it transformed the architecture of his face entirely and revealed something underneath the control that was genuinely warm. He reached up and touched her jaw with the back of 2 fingers. Barely contact, a gesture that asked rather than claimed. She did not move. He said, I want you at this table permanently, not as an employee. She looked at him steadily. Then stop talking about the table, she said, and say what you actually mean. Dante Ferraro, the most feared man in the city, the architect of an empire built on composed and calculated language, took a breath. He said, I mean you are the only person in every room I walk into who does not flinch from what I am. I mean that you make every operation you touch smarter, faster, and more honest than it has ever been. I mean that I cannot imagine this city without you in it, and I find that I do not want to. Marisol was quiet for a moment. She thought about the diner, the plates, the $9,000 ledger entry, and the 6 women on a list. She thought about the window on Via Ressa and the woman standing straight in it. She thought about her mother's handwriting and the lesson it carried. She looked at Dante Ferraro, the most dangerous man she had ever met, and she said, we negotiate the terms. Together, as equals. He said, yes. She said, and I keep my own accounts. He kissed her the way 2 forces meet at a fault line, not collision, not surrender, but recognition. The kind of meeting that had been building underground long enough that when it finally broke the surface, it remade the landscape entirely. Behind them, zip-tied and very much aware, 3 Calabrese men had the singular misfortune of witnessing exactly what the underworld had not yet understood. That Marisol Vega had always been the most dangerous person in every room she had ever entered. She had simply been waiting for the room worth staying in, and the man brave enough to want her to. And that is where we leave them. Marisol with her numbers, and her spine and her terms, and Dante with his empire finally running clean, both of them in a high glass tower, above a city that had no idea what was coming next. If you felt that one, if you held your breath in the diner booth, or found yourself cheering in that darkened office when she swept his ankle and zip-tied the rest, you already know why stories like this one exist. Because sometimes the person everyone walks past is carrying the whole city on her back, and she has simply been waiting for someone worth showing it to. Drop in the comments. What was your favorite moment? The ledger across the table with 2 fingers? The filing cabinet? Or that last line? We negotiate the terms, together, as equals. Tell me which scene hit hardest for you. If this story deserved more than one watch, please hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to see a woman like Marisol get exactly what she earned. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that being underestimated is not the same thing as being beatable. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because the next story is already waiting, and I promise you, it is worth being there for from the very first line.